Why is that old Leech here? We don't have space." The words cut through the air like a blade. I stood frozen at the door, my hand still on the doorknob, feeling my body freeze. My daughter-in-law's scream echoed through the hallway, crossing the living room, reaching even the curious neighbors who, in disguise, peeked through the half-open window. The sound carried more than anger. There was contempt. There was that tone that turns you into an intruder within your own family. My son stood 2 steps away from her, motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor, his mouth tense, his nervous hands squeezing and releasing his phone. I knew him well. That silence wasn't from surprise. It was from complicity. The shame didn't come from me being there, but from the fact that she had screamed so loudly. His shame was from being seen with a mother like me. Behind them, my grandchildren watched the scene as if it were a theater play. The older one, 12 years old, avoided looking at me. The younger one, only 7, bit her lips and swung her legs on the sofa, not understanding well, but feeling the weight in the air. Even the television, playing a children's cartoon, seemed to have lowered its volume, suffocated by the silence that came after the insult. I took a deep breath. The smell of reheated food mixed with my daughter-in-law's overly sweet perfume invaded my nostrils. Her face, overly made up, was tense with arrogance. Her chin raised, her arms crossed as if erecting an invisible barrier to prevent me from entering. Her eyes pierced me from top to bottom, lingering on my worn shoes, the simple coat I had sewn years ago, and the gray strands that escaped from the scarf on my head. "I just came to bring the cookies you like," I murmured, showing the bag I held so carefully. My voice came out low, almost an apology for existing. The bag trembled slightly in my hands, and I saw when she twisted her mouth in a smile of disdain. It wasn't the first time. There was always a sideways comment, a crooked look, a joke said amid muffled laughter about people who don't know how to behave. But it had never been so explicit, so cruel, so public. It was as if suddenly she had torn off the mask and shown what she had been keeping for so long. I felt a weight accumulate in my chest, a mixture of sadness and anger, as if all the sleepless nights and all the years of hard work were concentrated in that instant. I looked at my son, the one to whom I gave everything, for whom I washed other people's floors, swallowed insults, spent nights at the sewing machine. He said nothing. He didn't raise his eyes. He didn't extend his hand to defend me. The neighbors outside slowly moved away. They pretended not to have heard, but I knew. In the neighborhood, nothing goes unnoticed. And that night, I had been turned into a spectacle of humiliation. I remained silent, not the silence of one who accepts, but of one who registers. There are silences that wound, but there are also silences that prepare. I didn't argue, didn't beg for entry, didn't scream back. I just let my eyes rest for long seconds on her face, as if I wanted to engrave every detail, every gesture, every word spat. It was at that instant, there on the doorstep, that I felt something change inside me. I realized that that scream wasn't just about space in the house, it was about expelling me from their lives. It was about stealing what I built, about erasing me as if I were an unwanted burden. And suddenly I knew. There was something more behind that hostility, something hidden that justified so much poison. I held the bag of cookies more firmly. I smiled slightly, without showing my teeth. And I fell silent, because in that silence, it was no longer fragility. It was decision. And I decided to observe. I decided to wait. I decided to discover. And at that same instant, I felt that the story wouldn't end at that door. It was just beginning. When I returned home that night, the sound of her screams still reverberated in my ears, as if it had gotten stuck to the walls of my chest. I sat in the old armchair in the living room, the fabric already worn, but soft like a mother's lap, and left the bag of cookies untouched on the table. I didn't even open it. The sweet smell that once brought memories of comfort now seemed bitter. I looked around. My house was simple, but every object there had a story. The sewing machine leaning in the corner, with peeling paint, was the same one with which I spent entire nights, sewing clothes for neighbors and strangers. It was with it that I gathered my first savings. On the shelf, a frame with my son's photo on graduation day, him in his gown, the smile illuminating his face, and me, with the blue dress I sewed in a hurry for that moment. I remember I cried so much, not just for the diploma, but because I saw in him the promise of a different life, far from the humiliations I myself endured. Now, ironically, it was within my own family that I felt the cruelest rejection. My daughter-in-law's little jokes started discreet, but never innocent. "You don't need to bring food, we eat light things here," she would say, with that air of superiority. Or, "Those spices have such a strong smell, right? It's hard to get it out afterward." And my son, always silent. Sometimes he even smiled awkwardly, like someone who agrees, like someone who finds it easier not to contradict. It was in that silence that the wound deepened. Because the scream, that I could bear. But his silence, that cut me deeper. I looked at my own hands. Wrinkled, full of marks, but firm. Hands that never let food be lacking, never refused work, never stopped protecting. I thought about everything I endured, from the crooked looks of employers to the times they pretended not to see me entering through the service gate. I swallowed a lot because I believed that one day my effort would be recognized. And now it was my own daughter-in-law who called me a parasite, and my son hid behind silence. I laid my head on the back of the armchair and let the memories come. Me, young, climbing the hills with heavy market bags to sell. Me, waking up before sunrise to prepare lunchboxes, sew, wash, do whatever was necessary. Me, wiping hidden tears, but raising my head in front of him because I didn't want my boy to grow up feeling ashamed of his mother. That night, I understood something. They didn't despise me just for being old. There was something beyond age. There was the discomfort of seeing me as I am, black, marked by life, but still standing. They wanted me to disappear. They wanted the space. They wanted the silence. They wanted the inheritance. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time, I didn't feel just pain. I felt a spark, small but clear. It wasn't revenge, yet it was something deeper. It was the certainty that I needed to observe better, that there was a reason for so much hatred. I got up, took the bag of cookies and stored them in the refrigerator. Each gesture of mine was slow, calculated. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't ask for explanations. I would wait, because those who wait see. And deep in my chest, a low voice told me the answer to so much contempt would soon appear. If you've also carried that silence that hurts more than any scream, you know what I'm talking about. And that's why I tell you, don't be silent. Follow me on this journey, because my story, so particular, might be the mirror of yours. It was at that instant that I decided my revenge would begin with patience. The next day, I woke up early, still with heavy eyes from a poorly slept night. I prepared my strong black coffee, the way I always did my whole life, and sat at the kitchen table. The steam rose from the cup, fogging my glasses for an instant, and I caught myself staring at nothing. The silence of the house was so deep it almost seemed to mock me. I thought about my daughter-in-law's words, "old Leech," and my son's lowered face, complicit through silence. That corroded me more than the insult. I decided, then, to return to their house, but this time with different eyes. I would no longer be the unsuspecting visitor who arrives carrying cookies and hope. I would be the woman who observes, who perceives, who collects every detail. I wore a simple blouse, adjusted the scarf on my hair and left, carrying only my purse and the courage that was beginning to be born silently inside me. When I arrived, I found my daughter-in-law impeccably dressed, even at home. The tight dress, red nails, flawless lipstick. She looked me up and down like someone analyzing merchandise. She forced a smile, but her eyes said something else. My son, as always, tried to disguise the discomfort, fiddling with papers on the table. "I just came to visit the children," I said, firmly, like someone who asks permission and at the same time doesn't ask. My voice came out more controlled than I expected. She stepped back a little, letting me pass, but the gesture was dry, almost hostile. I sat on the sofa and kept observing. The older grandson was with a school book, and I noticed how he shrank when he saw me. It wasn't childish rejection, it was fear of displeasing his mother. The younger one, on the contrary, ran to me and nestled in my lap. It was in that hug that I felt my heart warm, but also the certainty that there was a battle being fought inside there, a silent battle, and I was the enemy. While I talked with the children, I noticed my daughter-in-law's quick movements. She approached my son, whispered something, and from time to time, cast glances in my direction, like someone evaluating how much space I still had in that house. It was at that moment that I saw. She hid a thick envelope inside a shelf drawer. The gesture was quick, almost imperceptible, but my eyes captured it. My heart raced. That wasn't just pestering, it wasn't just racism disguised as comments. There was something more concrete, something that involved papers, maybe documents. That envelope seemed to weigh more than gold. I swallowed hard and continued smiling at the children, pretending naturalness. But inside, a flame began to burn. I knew I couldn't act immediately. I needed to wait, observe, collect every sign. The silence that until yesterday was pain began to transform into strategy. I got up, said goodbye, and left calmly, without raising suspicions. The street wind hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel just humiliation. I felt I was facing a mystery, and those who keep secrets always end up leaving traces. And at that instant, I walked back home knowing I had just found the first one. I returned home with my heart beating stronger than normal. My daughter-in-law's face, tense when hiding that envelope, wouldn't leave my head. I lay down a bit, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I kept listening to the insistent tick-tock of the clock on the wall, as if each second were a reminder that something important was about to be revealed. 2 days later, I found an excuse to return. I said I wanted to bring a fresh cornbread cake for the grandchildren. When I arrived, she wasn't home. Just my son and the children. He seemed more relaxed without her presence, but still maintained that air of distance. We talked little, and at one point he went to answer a work call. It was in that interval that my eyes scanned the room, searching discreetly. I opened the shelf drawer, pretending to organize some board games that were messy. And there they were, crumpled papers, a contract draft, blurred copies. My fingers trembled when I recognized the name written in blue ink, mine. It was my house. The vision hit me like a punch in the stomach. The document showed attempts at property transfer, forged signatures, discussed values. It was clear that there were plans to tear me away not only from my son's heart, but also from the only security I had built in life. I felt my legs wobble, but I forced myself to stay calm. I collected one of the crumpled papers from the trash, folded it carefully, and hid it in my skirt pocket. My heart hammered in my chest, but my face remained serene when he returned to the room. I pretended to play with the children, as if nothing had happened. On the way home, each step seemed to weigh tons. The street noise mixed with a storm that echoed inside me. I remember the early mornings when I worked double shifts, washing clothes for rich families, sewing until my fingers bled, all to buy that little piece of land. I remember the first night sleeping there, the pride of having a key that was only mine. And now they were plotting to tear me away from my own history. I entered the house, sat at the table, and placed the paper on the wooden top. I ran my hand slowly over it, as if it were an enemy to be studied. I didn't cry. The time for tears had passed. There, something was born inside me they didn't know who they were dealing with. For the first time, a discreet smile escaped my lips. It wasn't joy. It was the spark of discovery, the flame of resistance. Because I knew this was just the beginning. And if there was evidence in the trash, I clearly imagined there would be much more hidden where the right eyes hadn't yet searched. In the following days, I began to walk with the calm of someone who pretends not to see, but sees everything. My daughter-in-law continued with her false smiles, always seasoned with that subtle poison. Comments about my simple clothes, about how certain people don't adapt to finer places, or even jokes about my hair, as if it were carelessness instead of identity. Each word of hers now sounded like a piece of a puzzle, and I was already beginning to glimpse the complete image. I remained silent. I knew I couldn't accuse her without concrete evidence. The paper found in the trash was just a trace, but not enough to tear down the mask she wore in front of everyone. So I began to prepare. One morning, I went to the registry office. I entered with firm steps, the smell of old paper and stamp ink bringing me memories of the times I fought to sign contracts that would give me a piece of dignity. I asked for copies of my house deed. The attendant, a young man with tired eyes, took a few minutes, but handed me the official documents, intact in my name. There was the greatest proof. No one could say that house wasn't mine. I left there raising the folder as if it were an invisible trophy. On the street, people passed hurriedly, but I walked slowly, savoring the feeling that truth was on my side. The following week, fate gave me another opportunity. My daughter-in-law forgot her phone on the kitchen table while answering the door. The lit screen blinked with notifications from a group of friends. My heart accelerated, but my fingers moved quickly. I took some photos with my own device, recording the messages. And what I read there burned my chest, but also strengthened my decision. Between emojis and giggles, she boasted, "Soon that old woman will disappear from here. I already told Son's name that it's not working anymore. These people think they have rights to everything just because they struggle their whole life. Little does she know her time is up." Another message said, "I imagine her face when she realizes she'll have to look for a little room in the periphery. It'll even be funny." My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was anger mixed with a strange calm. Because now I had evidence. Now I could unmask not only the prejudice, but the malice disguised as family planning. I returned home that day with the registry folder and the photos on my phone. I put everything in an old shoebox, hidden in the back of the closet, along with my most valuable memories. It was my silent arsenal. In front of the mirror, I faced my own eyes. I saw deep wrinkles. I saw white strands. I saw skin marked by years. But I also saw strength. I saw the woman who survived when everyone said she wouldn't make it. I saw the mother who raised a son alone, even when the world wanted her on her knees. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the harbinger of the storm I myself would unleash at the right moment. And at that instant, I knew I didn't need to raise my voice. I just had to wait for the occasion. And the occasion, sooner or later, would come to me. The invitation arrived as I expected, a show-off party. My daughter-in-law loved to flaunt, and this time would be no different. A sophisticated dinner at the house itself, with my son's work colleagues, important neighbors, and some distant relatives. It was the perfect scenario for her to show herself as the owner of everything, including me. When I received the message, I almost heard her mocking voice. "Of course you can come. After all, family is family." Accompanied by a fake smile emoji. I breathed deeply and accepted. She didn't imagine that, at that moment, I already had in my hands the original documents, copies from the registry office, and the racist messages she herself spread in secret. On the day of the party, I prepared myself without haste. I chose my best dress, that navy blue one I wore at my son's graduation, sewn by myself. It wasn't expensive, but it had dignity. I adjusted the scarf over my head, pinned my gray hair carefully, and perfumed myself with a soft lavender essence I always saved for special occasions. When I arrived, the house was illuminated. The facade displayed expensive cars parked, and the windows let escape laughter and the clinking of glasses. Upon entering, everyone looked at me as if I were just an uncomfortable detail. My daughter-in-law came to me, her tight dress shining under the lights, and whispered with a poisonous smile, "Don't spill wine on the imported tablecloth, okay?" Giggles echoed around. I just stared at her, without responding, and walked to the corner of the room. I observed everything calmly. My son, tense, tried to move among the guests naturally, but I noticed the stiffness in his shoulders. He also knew something was about to happen, although he couldn't predict what. While the dishes were being served, my daughter-in-law made sure to expose me in small provocations. Mother-in-law, would you prefer dessert cutlery, or can you eat like that?" And giggles would arise. A guest, embarrassed, lowered her eyes, but said nothing. Subtle racism, the kind that infiltrates the cracks of education, dominated the environment. I, however, was calm. Each word of hers was just more fuel for the fire I was lighting inside. I held the juice glass like someone holding a secret, and when the toast was announced, my son raised his voice, trying to sound proud. "To our family's future." The glasses rose. It was at that instant that I decided. I rested my purse on the table and, with firm gestures, removed the documents I had kept. The sheets slid under the light, revealing the official stamps. Funny to talk about the future. My voice cut through the buzz. Because the present seems to be full of lies. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Everyone turned to me. My daughter-in-law widened her eyes, the smile frozen on her face. I raised the papers and continued. "This house, which many think belongs to my son, always was and continues to be mine. It's in my name, and any plan to tear me away from here falls apart before this evidence. The guests looked at each other, confused. My son's face paled, and it was then that I took out my phone and showed the lit screen with the messages I had photographed. The racist and mocking words appeared before everyone, illuminated by the coldness of technology. Digital giggles that now burned in public. The silence became unbearable. Even the clinking of cutlery ceased. And at that instant I realized her mask had fallen, and what came next would transform that night forever. My son was the first to react. He tried to snatch the papers from my hands, but I stepped back, raising them high so everyone could see. The tension on his face reminded me of when he was a boy and had been caught lying, wide eyes, dry mouth, nervous hands. But now there was no innocent excuse. There was complicity. "Mom, this isn't necessary," he whispered, but the whisper was loud enough to be heard. "You're exaggerating." Before he finished, one of the guests, a work colleague of his, got up from the table and took one of the documents. He read silently, with arched eyebrows, and shook his head in disapproval. The weight of truth no longer needed my voice, it was already stamped on paper. My daughter-in-law, with no way out, tried to laugh. A thin, hysterical laugh that broke in the air. "Ah, those messages. It was just joking between friends. Nothing serious." But no one laughed along. On the contrary, the looks hardened. One of the women present stood up indignantly. "Joking? You call mocking your own mother-in-law, a woman who gave everything for her son to be where he is, joking?" My daughter-in-law's face turned red, and she tried to justify herself, but each word only sank her deeper. My son's silence was now a sentence. He lowered his head, unable to sustain anyone's gaze. I felt something strange inside me. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't blind revenge. It was an immense calm, as if every tear swallowed in silence, every night of humiliation, had finally found an echo. I took my glass, tapped it lightly with the spoon, and spoke with a firm voice. I endured jokes, looks, contempt. I endured it because I believed that family love was worth more than wounded pride. But today I realize there's a limit. Kindness is not weakness. Respect is not a favor. And I no longer accept being treated as an intruder in what is mine. The words echoed through the room. Someone discreetly pulled out their phone and started recording. I saw the reflection of my own image on the screen, a firm woman, upright, without fear. My daughter-in-law dropped her glass with such force that the crystal shattered on the floor. The sound was like a period. She screamed something inaudible, but no one paid attention. She ran toward the door, stumbling in her heels, while the guests followed her with looks of contempt. And I stood there in the center of the room, feeling that finally, after so many years of silence, my voice had been heard. But inside me I knew that night still wasn't over. The greater weight would fall on my son, and I was ready to face that moment too. He stood still in the middle of the room, hands in his pockets, as if he wanted to dig a hole to disappear right there. His pale face, red eyes, short breathing. His silence was no longer just uncomfortable, it was condemnation. All eyes turned to him, waiting for some reaction, some defense. "Mom!" His voice came out hoarse, trembling. I didn't know it had gone so far. I stared at him. I felt a pang of compassion, as every mother feels, but also a weight of disappointment that seemed to crush my shoulders. I knew he knew. Maybe not all the details, but he knew enough to have defended me and chose the opposite. He chose silence, convenience, comfort. He fell to his knees before everyone, as if gravity had finally collected its debt. "Forgive me, Mom," he murmured, his eyes watery. I was a coward. The people around murmured in shock. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others recorded everything on their phones. The party, which before was a stage for ostentation, now transformed into a public tribunal. I didn't touch him. I remained erect, firm, holding the documents to my chest. It was strange. That scene, which could have brought me pleasure in seeing him humiliated, only brought me a deep emptiness. "You chose to close your eyes to what was happening right in front of you," I responded, in a calm but cutting voice. "You chose to let me swallow every insult alone. There's no forgiveness that can erase what you allowed." He cried, his shoulders shaking, his voice failing. But I knew those tears were late. They weren't born from true repentance, but from the shame of being exposed before everyone. And maybe that was true justice, that he for the first time felt on his skin the humiliation he so many times let me carry alone. The guests remained silent, like witnesses to something greater than a family fight. It was a naked, cruel revelation of how racism and contempt can hide even within what we call home. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt that I didn't need to scream. The truth was already screaming for me. I raised my head, breathed deeply, and let the weight of my words hover in the air. A mother's love is not a license for disrespect. And today, before everyone, I choose to stand up without you. The entire room shuddered, and the fate of my family I knew would never be the same. He remained kneeling, crying softly like a lost child. But I no longer saw the boy I raised. I saw a man who chose to turn his face when his own mother was diminished. The weight of my words echoed in the room, and no one dared interrupt. Then an older neighbor, invited out of courtesy, stood up. Mrs. Alzira, who had known me since the times I crossed the street with heavy bags and the boy by the hand. She spoke in a firm tone, broke the silence with unexpected courage. I always saw this woman fight. I saw her wake up before sunrise. I saw her deny food from her own plate to give to her son. And today, to see you trying to tear away from her even what is rightfully hers, it's shameful. A chorus of murmurs ran through the hall. Someone was filming, another nodded silently. The masks were falling apart, and I realized that moment wouldn't be confined to those walls. It would be told, retold, and soon would be in the mouth of the entire neighborhood. My son tried to approach, but I raised my hand. The simple gesture stopped him as if it were an invisible barrier. "I don't want your late pity," I said firmly. "I just want you to understand, I'm not a burden. I never was. The burden is carrying the cowardice of those who remain silent." He lowered his head once more. My daughter-in-law, who until then remained near the door, couldn't resist. She pushed the exit and disappeared into the night, with her heels stumbling on the asphalt. No one followed her. Gradually, the guests withdrew, some embarrassed, others murmuring words of support. Only a few close neighbors remained, who hugged me in silence. I felt in that touch something I had long lacked, recognition. When I returned home, the streets were almost empty. The dawn wind hit my face, but I didn't shrink. I walked erect, like someone carrying an invisible crown. The next day, my phone didn't stop. Messages, videos, audios circulated. The mother-in-law who didn't stay quiet. The woman who unmasked the racist daughter-in-law. The entire neighborhood talked, and even people who never spoke to me came knocking at my gate to say, "You were pure courage, ma'am." For the first time, my silence had transformed into voice. A voice that echoed not only for me, but for all those who had already swallowed insults in silence. And deep down, I knew, the greatest revenge wasn't screaming or expelling. It was having shown, before everyone, that kindness is not submission, that aging is not becoming invisible, and that my color, my age, and my story were never reasons for shame but for pride. I smiled alone, sitting in the same armchair where I had cried hidden so many times. Now, in that same place, there was peace, and an immense certainty my voice would never be silenced again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, because every time a voice like mine rises, it opens the way for others to also stand up.